friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori, and today is my 33rd birthday, which is bonkers in so many ways. And I wanted to do a video that's a little bit more in the personal vein. This is a topic that I have been percolating on for a very long time, and I've been trying to script something out that would make some kind of cohesive sense, and I'm not entirely sure I've been able to do that. So finally I got to the point where I was like, you know what? We're just gonna have a sit-down conversation about it, because I think that is the best approach for a topic like this for me personally. I want to talk about finding myself in fantasy as a woman. So this probably isn't going to come as much of a surprise to any of you, but I've always been kind of a lot of a tomboy. And that, growing up, that was tough. That was a learning experience, a self-learning experience that I've gone throughout my life, is really figuring out where I fit in on the spectrum of femininity and womanhood, and really trying to figure out if I had a place there. Now that I'm 33, I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I have done so many years of introspection and reflection on this as I've grown as a person, and I feel so much more confident than I ever have before in who I am as a person, and that's a really beautiful feeling. So one of the first influences I had in fantasy was the Chronicles of Narnia. I watched and grew up on the old BBC adaptation that was, you know, super cringy CGI, but I absolutely loved it at the time. And Susan and Lucy, neither of them were any sort of something I felt like I could relate to. I actually related most of all to Edmund. He is still to this day my favorite character in all of the Chronicles of Narnia, because I felt like Edmund was the most real. Edmund was the one who was a bit of a sasspot, and he was very driven, and he was going to make his own choices, and he flopped on his face and made some big mistakes, but also came back and had that redemption arc, and I felt so connected to that idea of a character. Susan and Lucy were both, you know, nothing against those characters, but I didn't feel like either one of them were particularly relatable to me. Moving into Lord of the Rings, which was another huge influence, I saw the movies for the first time when I was, I think, 11, was around when Fellowship came out, and the first thing I'm going to say is that Galadriel, Arwen, and Éowyn are powerhouse female characters. And I love that Peter Jackson really took the time to dig into each one of them and give them more screen time than I have heard they got in the books. And when it comes to those three, they were almost like a standard so far beyond me that, you know, how can you compare yourself to someone like Arwen? Like, you just can't, right? I still love the scene with the water horses. It was super cool. But again, this kind of pinnacle of femininity is really how I viewed all three of them. And with Éowyn, out of the three, she was definitely the one that I related to the most, and I think that's fairly self-explanatory, because she wasn't going to be left behind, and she threw on a set of armor and she killed the Witch King. Spoiler. So obviously there was a lot there that I felt drawn to, but again, there were other characters that I always related to more. Now, I had a huge stint of anime, and I mean, anime is its own thing, and I don't really want to belabor it too long, because I feel like that's a whole different discussion. But I mean, if I'm looking at some of my earliest anime influences, like Rurouni Kenshin and Yu-Gi-Oh! And Naruto, like, again, none of the female characters in those really stuck out to me as being relatable to me personally. They're always a bit too giggly and girly, and, like, you know, they were always crushing on boys, and that just wasn't me growing up. So again, like, I looked elsewhere for relatable characters to see myself in, and as I went further and further into that as a young kind of preteen teenager, I started wondering if there was something wrong with me, if I'm being totally honest, because I was like, I don't feel like I fit in with any of these female characters. Is that a me problem or a them problem? as we're moving out of that phase, we start to get into some of my high school and college influences, and this is where things started to get a little easier for me. I discovered the Underworld films when I was in late high school, I believe, and Celine was one of the first characters that I was immediately like, hey, I get that. Which probably says a lot about me, but Celine was a character that I really, really connected with right away. I loved her personality, I loved her attitude, I loved her agency was something that really appealed to me, that I really loved, and I love those films. Those films are still incredibly foundational for me as a fantasy writer and reader and enthusiast. And then the next one that I found was during my college years in Brienne of Tarth. And Brienne of Tarth is a character that I can't say enough lovely things about. I love her so much, and here's why. She's a strong female character with a sword, right? She's a knight, and she knows that she doesn't fit into the space that society has allowed for her, but she also isn't just this aggressive, angry, one-note character. She's vulnerable. She's fearful. She has so many layers to her of misgivings and doubts and trying to do the right thing and this very strong sense of justice and honor. And I love that. I love her so much. She's such a great character. Moving past that into getting onto BookTube, I have been so grateful for all of the incredible books that I have read where I have finally feel like I am starting to find a place within this genre that I love so much, and in seeing myself in a lot of these female characters. And I have some books I'm going to highlight at the end of this video for you guys of female characters that I've really loved. For me personally, going through all of the experiences of being a wife and a mother and just learning to embrace my brand of womanhood has been such a powerful journey for me throughout the years. And finding my place in fantasy honestly came down to the realization that it doesn't matter who I relate to. And that's something that I think was very liberating for me. And maybe that sounds like a duh thing to you guys, but recognizing that I didn't have to try so hard to find female characters that I related to. It didn't matter which character I related to, because at the end of the day, characters are characters, regardless of gender, and they should never be one note, regardless of gender. And there should be layers and nuances and beauty and flaws and all of these things to these characters. And whoever you relate to, that's who you relate to. And I think that was a really exciting thing for me to come to, is that acceptance of, I just love the characters that I love, and I relate to the characters that I relate to because they're incredible characters. Some of them are female, some of them are not, and that's okay. Obviously, we all know that so much of growing up is figuring out who you are as a person. And I think so often we try to project ourselves onto characters in a way that almost asks them to tell us who we are. And I think that that's fine up to a point. As a writer, I was heavily influenced by so many incredible writers, and for years I tried to mimic what I saw. And now as an adult, as I've learned to trust and develop my own voice as a writer, I'm starting to feel that liberation and freedom of just being my own self as a writer, and that's really cool. Anyways, that was a ramble. But I don't know, it was something that's been on my mind for a while, and I've been procrastinating on making this video because I didn't know how to format it in a way that would have been intelligent and made sense. So I just kind of threw it together. So I hope you guys like it. I want to highlight a few books here at the end of the video that have some incredible female characters that I have been privileged to read. And these are characters that I particularly relate to a little bit more than average, but one of the beautiful parts about just letting go of the need to relate to female characters throughout my life is that I've found an appreciation, I think, for a lot of female characters that I don't necessarily relate to, and I feel a lot more open to letting their stories mean something to me more than they used to. So here are some of the books that I absolutely love that have some absolute banger female characters in them. The first one, surprising nobody, I'm going to highlight Malazan Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson. There are such incredible female characters in here. There's a smorgasbord of characters in general, and all of these characters just feel so well realized and equal and interesting, and they're so deep and nuanced, and I love that about them. Another one that is a very recent read for me that I absolutely loved is Juliette Marillier. Daughter of the Forest is the only book of hers I have read so far, but I purchased pretty much everything else she's written as soon as I finished reading this, because Sorsha was such a magnetizing main character. She's young, it's a coming-of-age story, and she really has to push through a horrible situation pretty much on her own, and the effects of trauma are handled exceptionally well in this book, in my opinion, and I'm just so excited to keep reading more of Juliette Marillier's work. Next up is The Long Price Quartet by Daniel Abraham. Kian is a character in here that I think you meet in book 2 or 3. And she's still, hands down, one of my favorite female fantasy characters I've ever read. She's so interesting and strong, and like the relationship that she's in is such an incredibly powerful representation of a solid relationship. It's beautiful. I'm trying to say things without spoilers. The next one is Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong. This is the story of Misaki and her son Mamoru. Misaki is a warrior who's had to put aside her sword to become a wife and a mother, and she's hiding that aspect of herself. And her young 15-year-old son is training to become a elite warrior of the sect that they are a part of. And Misaki's story is so powerful and beautiful, and the struggle of finding yourself as a woman with a warrior spirit, I think, is just such a it's beautifully written in this book. Next up is Never Die by Rob J. Hayes, and right on the front of the cover here you can see Itami Cho, who is the first member of a motley crew that's kind of developed in this book. And Itami is a very stoic samurai character, and she kind of becomes the axis of her motley crew, and I adored her character. I loved her so much. This whole book I absolutely loved to bits and pieces. I know you guys have heard me talk about it a lot. The next one that I wanted to highlight was We Are the Dead by Mike Shackle. This is book 1 of his Last War trilogy, and the women in this story are so powerful in their ordinariness. And what I mean by that is Mike Shackle really leans into the layered contradictions of what makes us human. That a coward can become one of the bravest people alive, and a mother who no one would have looked twice at on the street in this horrible invasion situation that the characters are in takes a stand for her family. And like, there's just so much. There's so many things in this book that I really, really loved. And last but not least, this is going to shock everyone, I'm sure, and that is Red Rising. Pierce Brown's female characters were some of the fastest I ever related to in fiction. And I love that. There's so many different types of characters in this book. And I think that's something that I really want to highlight, is that regardless of what gender a character is, I love to see really well-realized, nuanced, interesting characters that aren't just one note in any aspect. I realize that I'm focusing on female characters in this video specifically, but in general, I would have the same comments on any character who felt very one note. And Red Rising, it is my favorite series of all time because I love these characters. I love these characters so much, and I relate to so many characters in this book. And it's just, it has been a wonderful experience to have this series as one of my foundational favorites. So anyway, that is a rambly video about me struggling to relate to female characters through through my lifetime. Thanks for joining me. But yeah, I hope you guys got something out of this. I still haven't been able to articulate how I would like to my experience with this. In conclusion though, it's been a learning curve, because I think letting go of my need to find female characters to relate to and just relating to characters period has been a huge like growing point for me as I've read more and been exposed to new stories and new characters. And I found some really amazing authors and some really amazing characters that I love and relate to, and that's been a really beautiful gift. So, anyways, I'm done rambling now. I hope you guys have had a great week. I hope that you are reading 5-star reads, and I'll see you in the next video.